Snow whispered through the pines like a secret only the hills could keep. The last light of day spilled amber across the clearing where June Mallory swung her axe, the rhythm of her solitude as steady as the crack of splitting wood. Each swing echoed against the hollow ache inside her chest, one that hadn't known warmth since the mountain took her husband 2 winters ago. The cabin stood a few paces off, smoke curling weakly from its crooked chimney. The boards creaked with the cold, patched and repatched by her own hands. She'd learned to do everything herself now: haul water, mend fences, stack logs higher than she could see. The silence had become her company, her punishment, her prayer. From the ridge above Coyote Bend, the town below was only a rumor. Folks said she'd gone half wild, that the widow in the hills no longer spoke to anyone but the wind. Maybe they were right. The sound of an axe splitting a log was cleaner than gossip, truer than pity. She wiped her brow with a torn flannel sleeve and stooped to gather the split pieces. The light was fading fast. Coyotes would be stirring soon. That's when she heard it. A sharp, muffled grunt followed by the thud of something heavy hitting snow. June froze, the hair on her neck prickling. The forest was her companion. She knew every sound it made. This one didn't belong. She turned slowly, hand drifting toward the hatchet at her belt. The sound came again, a horse's strained snort, then silence. Leaving the firewood behind, she trudged toward the tree line, snow crunching beneath her boots. Her heart hammered steadily but slowly. She didn't move like prey. She moved like someone who had nothing left to lose. A few yards out, she saw the shape. A horse standing rigid, reins dragging in the snow. A man lay crumpled beside it, one arm half buried in white powder, his coat dark with blood. "Lord above," she murmured, voice rough from disuse. He was young, 30 maybe, but his face was worn, the kind carved by sun and regret. His right side was soaked through where the bullet had gone in. For a long moment, June just stared. It had been 2 years since another soul crossed this clearing. 2 years since anyone needed her. She could turn back, close her door, pretend she hadn't seen him. The world had already taken enough from her. She owed it nothing. But her feet didn't move. Instead, she knelt, pressing 2 fingers against his throat. A pulse fluttered, weak but there. Fool thing. Ridin' hurt through this weather, she muttered, though her voice had softened. With effort that made her ribs burn, she heaved him over her shoulder, staggering under his weight. The horse followed close, snorting steam. By the time she reached the cabin, her breath came ragged, but she didn't stop. She pushed the door open with her boot and dragged him inside. The fire was dying, its coals barely alive. She threw on 2 logs and set to work, cutting away his coat, cleaning the wound with what little whiskey she had left. He never made a sound, even as she pressed a hot cloth to his side. Just clenched his jaw and stared at nothing. When the bleeding slowed, she wrapped the bandage tight and sat back on her heels, studying him in the flicker of firelight. He was no outlaw by the look of him, though she'd learned that faces lied. His hands were scarred, his clothes torn but well-made ones. "Don't die in my house," she said finally, as if setting a rule. "I've buried enough." The man didn't answer. He just breathed shallowly, the rise and fall of his chest the only sound besides the hiss of the fire. Outside, the snow thickened. Night fell, soft and endless. June leaned back against the wall, exhaustion creeping over her. She watched the flames dance across the stranger's face. He looked lost, but then again so did she. When she finally spoke again, it wasn't to him but to the empty air between them, her voice little more than a whisper. "Guess neither of us knows how to quit surviving." The storm howled, and the cabin creaked in reply. 2 broken lives drawn together by chance or maybe mercy on the coldest night of the year. Tomorrow, she'd decide whether to let him stay. Tonight, she kept the fire burning. By dawn, the storm had spent itself. The hills lay wrapped in a pale hush, the kind that only comes after a night of hard snow. June Mallory stood at her cabin window, watching the light crawl over the drifts. The world looked clean again, too clean for what it still held. Behind her, the stranger stirred. She turned just as he tried to sit up, a low groan escaping through his teeth. His eyes, gray-sharp despite the pain, met hers for the first time. "You're awake," she said, voice even but quiet. He blinked hard, disoriented, before answering. Where am I?" "In my cabin, 2 miles east of Coyote Bend." She crossed to the hearth, poured a tin cup of water, and handed it to him. "You were half frozen. Bullet wound in your side. I patched it the best I could." He hesitated before taking the cup, as if even water required caution. "Didn't ask for help," he muttered. June arched a brow. "Didn't ask you to fall bleeding in my woods, either." For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Thick, taut. Only the crack of the fire and the soft groan of the logs punctuated it. Then his voice softer. "Name's Cal Riggins." "June," she said simply. He nodded once, like the name carried weight. Then he looked away, jaw working as if words fought to stay inside. She busied herself with the kettle. "You eat?" He shook his head. "Then you will." The stew she ladled was thin, more water than meal, but she placed it in his hands all the same. He stared at it for a long time before tasting. His movements were slow, cautious, wounded, like an animal still deciding if it could trust the hand that fed it. "You from town?" she asked, pretending not to watch him. "Was," he said after a beat. "Worked a spread down south. Circle D." She froze at that name. Circle D was known in these parts, owned by a ranch foreman with a cruel reputation. "Didn't last long, I take it." He looked at the fire instead of her. "Did what I had to." The way he said it, flat, heavy, made her ask no more. She knew what "had to" meant out here. Hunger, debt, pride. All of it could drive a person to things they'd rather forget. He finished the stew, set the bowl aside, and closed his eyes like sleep was a fight he couldn't win. June sat back, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in months, another heartbeat echoed in the room with hers. That night, as the wind returned, Cal woke to find her tending the fire again. He watched her quietly, her face softened by the glow, her movements sure but weary. "You live alone?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "Been that way a while. No kin?" She shook her head. "Just me. Suit's fine. Can't be easy." She poked at the embers. "It's not meant to be." There was something about the way she said it, neither bitter nor self-pitying. Just fact-like she'd made peace with the loneliness, even as it hollowed her out. After a while, he said, "You saved my life." "I saved your body," she corrected. "The rest's on you." The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It settled between them like snow on pine branches. Quiet, weightless, inevitable. Cal's gaze drifted to the firewood stacked by the wall, each piece neat as soldiers. Her life was built on order, on the steady defiance of surviving alone. He understood that. He'd lived the same way, until it broke him. When dawn came again, June found him standing outside, leaning on the doorframe for balance. He watched the line of trees where his horse grazed weakly. "Reckon I'll head out once I can ride," he said. June folded her arms. "You'll bleed out before you clear the ridge." He looked at her, a flicker of stubbornness in his eyes. "Then I'll take my chances." She studied him for a moment, then sighed, half exasperated. "You're not going anywhere till I say you can." "I don't bury strangers." Cal gave a small nod, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." And though neither spoke again that morning, something unspoken settled between them. Respect, or maybe recognition, two people built from silence, bound by it now. Inside, the fire crackled on. The sound wasn't lonely anymore. By the end of the week, Cal Riggins could stand without swaying. The fever had broken, though the wound in his side still pulled when he moved too fast. June Mallory watched him from the porch as he stepped out into the pale sun, shoulders stiff beneath his borrowed coat. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Out here, words were rationed like salt. Instead, Cal reached for the axe leaning against the woodpile and tested its weight. June's brows knit together. "You're in no shape for that," he answered with the faintest smirk. "A man's got to earn his keep." The first swing was clumsy, his muscles still weak from blood loss, but the next found rhythm. Crack, crack, crack. The sound filled the clearing, steady as a heartbeat. June stood at the railing, arms crossed. She wanted to tell him to stop, to rest, but the sight of someone else's hands working, someone else's breath fogging in the cold air, brought something to her she hadn't felt in months. Life, shared. When he finished, she brought him water. "You'll undo all the healing you've done." He took the cup, nodding his thanks. "Feels good to be doing something. Cabin like this, hard to keep it standing on your own." "I've managed. I can see that." He looked around at the clean-cut logs, the neatly mended fence. "You're tougher than most ranch hands I knew." She gave a faint shrug, hiding the flush of warmth his words brought. "Didn't have a choice. They fell into a pattern after that." Cal would rise early, feeding the fire before she woke. He mended the chicken coop she'd been too tired to fix last fall, chopped kindling, and even patched the saddle she kept for memories more than for use. June cooked and cleaned, tending the wound when the bandage needed changing. Their words were few, but their silences began to shift. Less sharp, more companionable. One evening, as twilight turned the snow to lavender, Cal sat sharpening a knife by the hearth while June repaired a torn sleeve. He spoke without looking up. "You lose him to the cold?" The question hung heavy. June's hand stilled. "My husband, you mean?" Cal nodded, a quiet apology in his eyes. "Winter before last," she said after a moment. "He was cutting timber near the ridge. Snow came early. Never found him till spring." Cal lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry." "So was I," she murmured. "Then I got tired of it." Her tone wasn't cruel, just worn like old leather. For a while they said nothing. The only sound was the hiss of sap from the firewood, then Cal's voice low. "I ain't innocent either." June looked up. "Worked for a man named Dugan. Circle D Ranch. Mean bastard. Kept half the hands in debt one way or another. When he told me to ride with him to collect from a miner who owed, I didn't ask questions." He paused, jaw tightening. Turned out collecting meant robbing the poor soul blind. Things went badly. Real bad. June didn't interrupt. Her eyes stayed on him, steady, unreadable. "Got shot when I tried to walk away. Guess that's what I get for thinking you can leave men like Dugan without paying." He tossed a splinter into the fire, the flame snapping it up. June's voice was calm when she finally spoke. "You regret it?" Cal's answer came quickly. "Every day, that was all." But it was enough. She nodded once, as if filing away the truth of him. Then she went back to stitching. "You're not the first man who's done something he wished he hadn't." Cal looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Later that night, when the fire burned low, June stepped outside. The stars glittered sharply above the pines. Inside, she could hear Cal moving, slow, steady, alive. She realized then that for the first time since she'd buried her husband, she wasn't entirely alone. And when she went back inside, she noticed something she hadn't before. The silence didn't hurt. It rested. By late February, the snow began to thaw, dripping from the eaves like clock ticks counting down to change. The creek near the cabin cracked open in places, whispering of spring. Cal was walking without a limp now, strong enough to saddle June's old bay mare and haul water from the river. June watched him from the porch, arms folded, a faint crease between her brows. He moved with purpose but also with caution, as if expecting the ground beneath him to turn against him any minute. That morning, she caught him staring at the horizon more than once. "You're looking east," she said, voice even. He glanced up, a faint smile touching his lips. "Old habit. Someone chasing you from that direction?" Cal didn't answer right away. "Maybe." The word hung in the cold air like smoke. June said nothing more. She didn't pry, but her eyes followed him longer than she meant to. By mid-afternoon, she was out in the yard splitting the last of the winter logs when the sound of hooves cut through the quiet. June froze, axe in hand. She wasn't expecting anyone, not up here. The rider came into view through the trees, a tall man in a duster coat, his horse throwing steam with every breath. He carried the weight of authority before he even spoke. "Morning, ma'am," he called, tipping his hat. The badge on his chest flashed in the light. "Sheriff Amos Granger out of Coyote Bend." June wiped her hands on her apron. "Sheriff, what brings you this far up?" "Looking for a drifter. Name of Cal Riggins." His tone was polite, but it had an edge underneath. "Wanted for robbery outside Dead Man's Gulch. Might be hurt?" Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. "You think he'd come up this way?" Granger shrugged. "Tracks near the river point north. Just checking every homestead between here and the ridge." "You live alone?" June hesitated half a breath too long. "I do." The sheriff studied her face, then glanced toward the cabin. Smoke still curled from the chimney. The mare Cal had been working with was tied behind the barn, its fresh saddle marks glinting in the light. "Mind if I take a look around?" June's grip tightened around the axe handle. "You think a wounded outlaw's hiding in my kitchen, Sheriff?" Granger gave a tired smile. "Ma'am, I've seen stranger things." She stepped aside, forcing a breath that came out steady. "Be my guest." He walked the perimeter slowly, eyes sharp, pausing near the barn. June's stomach clenched. Cal's tracks were faint in the snow by the fence line leading toward the root cellar door. Inside, beneath the cabin's loose floorboards, Cal held his breath. The sheriff's boots creaked above him, each step loud as thunder. The air down there was thick with dust and fear. After what felt like an hour, Granger came back around front. "All right," he said finally. "Seems quiet enough." June gave a small nod. "Told you it was just me." He tipped his hat. "If you see anyone or hear anything, ride down to town. Dugan's men are still riled up from that Circle D mess. Some say this Cal fella double-crossed them before he ran." Her stomach twisted at the name. Dugan. So it was true. Cal's past was riding closer every day. "I'll keep watch," she said. "Appreciate it, ma'am." The sheriff turned his horse and rode off, snow crunching beneath hooves until the sound vanished into the trees. Only then did June exhale. She stepped inside and knelt, pulling back the rug that hid the loose plank. Cal blinked up at her from the darkness, his face pale but eyes steady. "He's gone?" She nodded. "For now." He pushed himself up, grimacing as he climbed out. "I didn't mean to drag this to your door." June's voice was low but firm. "You didn't drag it. I opened the door myself." He looked at her, something like shame flickering behind his eyes. He was right, though. I was part of that robbery. I didn't pull the trigger, but I didn't stop it either. June stood silent, weighing his words. "Then stop running from it." He met her gaze. "That easy?" "No," she said softly. "But it's a start." For a long while, they said nothing, just listened to the faint echo of wind pushing through the chimney. Then Cal whispered, almost to himself, "You should have left me where I fell." June's answer came quietly but sure. "I've buried one man in this life, Cal Riggins. I don't plan to bury another." Outside, the sky was bleeding pink against the white hills. Somewhere down the valley, the sheriff's horse was just a shadow now. And inside that cabin, two lives bound by silence and danger began to change course. The kind of shift that could never be undone. The next morning, frost clung to the trees like lace, and the world felt too quiet, like the calm before something breaks. June stood at the window, coffee cooling in her hands, watching Cal saddle his horse. He was leaving. He hadn't said the words yet, but she knew. Men who'd lived with guilt carried it like a brand. They never stayed long where kindness found them. "You plan on telling me before you ride off," she said finally, her tone steady. Or just let me find your tracks in the snow." Cal froze, one hand tightening on the reins. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" He turned to face her. "You hid me from the law, June. That sheriff's gonna ride back up here again, and next time he might bring Dugan's men with him." "I can't have that on you." She set the cup down hard enough to make it rattle. "I've lived with danger before, Cal. Wolves, storms, hunger. You're not the worst of it." "This isn't the same," he said, voice low but firm. "Dugan doesn't forgive. He'll kill anyone who stands between him and what's his." June's expression didn't change. "You're not his anymore." He let out a slow breath, the kind that comes from a man who's already made his peace. "I'll be gone by dawn." Then he turned and walked out, the door shutting with a final soft thud. The night came fast and heavy, pressing down on the valley like a held breath. June couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin sounded louder without his breathing in the next room. She sat by the fire, staring into the orange glow, trying to tell herself it was better this way. That silence was safer than company, but she couldn't make herself believe it. When the chickens outside started their wild, panicked clucking, she thought at first it was the wind. Then came the snarl. Low. Hungry. June grabbed her rifle and threw open the door. 3 wolves circled the coop, gray shapes in the moonlight. The largest had already broken through the wire. Dragging a hen out by the neck, she raised the rifle, but before she could fire, a shout rang out, deep, rough, cutting through the cold. "Cal." He charged from the tree line, swinging a burning branch like a weapon. The wolves snarled and scattered, one snapping at his boot as he lunged between them and the coop. "Get back," he yelled, voice hoarse. June fired once, the shot cracking the night wide open. The remaining wolves bolted into the dark, vanishing as fast as they'd come. For a heartbeat, only silence. Then Cal stumbled, clutching his side. June was there in an instant. "You fool, what were you thinking?" He grimaced, catching his breath. "Couldn't just ride off and let them take your flock." "You're bleeding again," she said, pressing her hand against his bandage. He gave a faint smile, teeth flashing white in the moonlight. "Guess that's what I get for trying to be a hero." "Don't joke," she muttered. But her voice trembled. They stayed there for a moment, close enough for her to feel his breath on her cheek, the heat of him against the cold air. Finally, she said, "You don't have to keep running. Cal, not from me, not from yourself." He looked at her, eyes soft, filled with something heavier than gratitude, something that scared them both. "Maybe I don't," he said quietly. The next morning, he didn't ride out. Instead, he fixed the coop's broken boards, hands moving with quiet purpose. June watched him from the porch, a small warmth blooming in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. Later, when he came inside, she poured him coffee without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing just once. It was enough. Neither spoke about the night before. They didn't have to. Out here, words were fragile things. Actions carried more truth. As the day faded, June found herself smiling for the first time in a long while. Small, unsure but real. For the first time since the snow had fallen, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was beginning again. And Cal Riggins, the man who had brought trouble to her door, had somehow brought her back to life instead. The thaw deepened. The snow pulled back to reveal the brown scars of earth, and with them the things winter had buried began to stir. Life and danger moved again through the valley. June Mallory was outside hanging laundry when she heard the sound. Hoofbeats, heavy, more than one. She turned toward the ridge, heart tightening. Cal was at the barn, hammer in hand, and when he lifted his head, their eyes met. No words needed. They both knew. He dropped the hammer and reached for the rifle leaning by the door. June's voice came low, sharp. "Inside. Now." By the time they shut the cabin door, 3 riders were already coming down the trail, dusty men in dark coats, guns on their hips. The lead rider was thick through the shoulders, his hat pulled low, his smile like a knife. Cal's jaw went rigid. Dugan. June's breath hitched. The name had haunted the edges of every conversation since he'd spoken it. Now it was real, flesh, blood, and fury. From the window she watched Dugan dismount, boots sinking in the mud. His voice carried like gravel when he called out, "Cal Riggins, you think you can rob my payroll, shoot my foreman, and just vanish up here like a ghost?" Cal's face went still. "You need to stay out of sight," he murmured. June shook her head. "He's looking for you. If he finds you here, he won't stop till he's burned this place to the ground. I can draw him off. You're in no shape." "June," he said, cutting her off gently but firmly, "I'm not letting them hurt you." Something inside her hardened. She'd buried one man who thought he had to save her. She wasn't about to lose another. "No," she said. "You'll do as I say." Before he could argue, she moved fast, lifting a hand to still him, then slipping out the back door and around the corner of the cabin. The cold air bit at her face as she stepped into the open. "You're trespassing," she called out, rifle balanced steady in her arms. Dugan turned, surprise flashing in his mean, narrow eyes. "Well now, didn't figure the ghost had company." "This is my land," June said, voice cold as steel. "Ain't no Cal Riggins here." Dugan chuckled, teeth yellowed from tobacco. "That so? You sure, ma'am? We tracked his horse up this way. Seems mighty strange for a lone widow to have a saddle with fresh sweat marks." Her pulse drummed in her throat, but she didn't waver. "My husband's horse. I keep it in use. Keeps me alive." He squinted, studying her. "Heard of you, Mrs. Mallory. Folks say you've gone a bit strange living out here all by your lonesome. Don't much like the company." "Guess they're right." She cocked the rifle. "So don't test it." For a long, breathless moment, neither moved. The only sound was the wind whistling low through the pines. Then Dugan's grin twisted. "If he's here, I'll find him." "I've got time." He turned to one of his men. "Check the barn." June stepped forward, blocking their path. "You take another step, I'll drop you right where you stand." Her tone carried no tremor. It wasn't a bluff, it was survival talking. Dugan hesitated, eyes narrowing. Behind the cabin, a faint creak gave him pause, just enough for him to look back toward the sound. But June didn't flinch, didn't look away. After a long beat, Dugan gave a dry chuckle. "Fine, ma'am. Guess the ghost got smart and kept riding north. But if I find out you're lying," he let the rest hang in the air. Then he swung into his saddle and tugged the reins. "Come on, boys." They rode off slowly, deliberately, like men making sure their presence lingered. Only when their shapes vanished into the timber did June lower the rifle. Her knees wobbled, but she stayed standing until the last hoofbeat faded. Then Cal appeared from the shadows, face pale. "You shouldn't have done that. I wasn't about to watch you die on my doorstep. You lied to Dugan. If he suspects, then we'll deal with it," she said. Voice firm. For the first time his mask cracked. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. "He'll be back, June. He doesn't let things go." She reached out, gripping his arm. "Neither do I." Their eyes locked, the space between them charged with something neither could name. "Not yet." The fire in her eyes, steady, unyielding, told him the truth. June Mallory might have lost a husband, but she hadn't lost her fight. And for the first time since the day he'd fallen bleeding in her snow, Cal believed he might just have something worth standing for. 2 days passed, and the valley held its breath. The sky turned the color of pewter, the air sharp enough to bite. June Mallory and Cal Riggins spoke little, but every glance, every quiet movement said what neither dared. Dugan wasn't finished. Cal kept his rifle close and his horse saddled. June kept watch from the porch, scanning the tree line till her eyes stung. At night the wolves howled again, distant but restless. The world felt like it was closing in. On the third morning she heard the sound she'd been dreading. Hooves. This time too many to count. Cal looked at her from the window, eyes grim. "He's back," June nodded once. "Then we're done hiding." She moved fast, checking the rifle. her fingers steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Cal reached for her arm. "If they take me, you run." "I'm not running," she said. Before he could answer, the sound of boots thudded outside. Then Dugan's voice boomed through the cold. "You should have told me the truth, widow. Would have saved you the trouble." Cal stepped to the door, shoulders squared. "Stay back," he told her quietly. He swung the door open and stepped out into the gray light. Dugan sat atop his horse like a king of ash, surrounded by 3 of his men. He grinned when he saw Cal. "Well, look who crawled out from under the porch." "Leave her out of it," Cal said. "I'd have left her be if she hadn't lied." Dugan's tone hardened. "You cost me 2 good men and a payroll. You're worth more to me dead than any lawman's bounty." He turned to one of his riders. "Grab her. We'll make him watch." June's door burst open before the man even took a step. She stood there, rifle raised, eyes burning cold as the barrel she aimed. "You'll touch nothing here." The rider froze. Dugan chuckled, low and cruel. "You think you'll scare me, lady?" "I don't need to scare you," she said. "Just need to be faster." Cal moved then, swift, instinctive, putting himself between her and Dugan's men. "Go on, Dugan. You want revenge? Take it from me." "Leave her." Always playing the hero, Dugan sneered. "Didn't suit you then, won't save you now." He drew his gun. The first shot tore through the silence, splintering the porch rail. June fired back before she thought, the recoil slamming her shoulder. One of Dugan's men cried out and fell. The others scattered, firing wildly. Cal charged forward despite his wound, tackling Dugan clean off his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling through mud and snow. Fists, shouts, gunmetal glinting in the light. Chaos in motion. June reloaded, her breath ragged, hands steady only by force of will. She saw Dugan reach for his revolver, saw Cal too slow to block. Her husband's rifle felt heavy in her arms, heavier than grief, but it found her shoulder like it remembered the way. She fired. The bullet buried itself in the ground inches from Dugan's head, the shot echoing like thunder through the trees. "Next one won't miss," she said. The fight stopped. Dugan froze, eyes wide, face pale with the sudden knowledge that she meant it. Cal staggered back, chest heaving. "Go!" he rasped. Before she changes her mind, Dugan spat blood into the snow. "You'll regret this," he hissed, climbing to his feet. June didn't lower the rifle. "I already have," she said. He gave one last look, something between fear and hatred, then mounted and rode off. His men limping behind. The forest swallowed them, leaving only the wind and the sharp smell of gunpowder. June rushed to Cal's side. He was on his knees, bleeding again where the old wound had torn open. She caught him as he fell, her arms wrapping around him. "Cal, stay with me," she whispered. He gave a faint laugh, half breath, half pain. "You shoot better than most men I know." "Stop talking," she said, tears streaking her face. "You'll make it." He looked up at her, eyes soft despite the blood on his lips. "You already saved me once, and I'll do it again." They stayed like that until the sound of horses faded into nothing. The wind carried away the smoke, the smell of death, the echoes of everything that almost was lost. When she finally dragged him back inside, the fire was still burning. June pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the weak, stubborn rhythm there. Outside, the storm broke apart, sunlight cutting through the clouds in trembling streaks. Inside, the silence held not fear but something gentler, earned, fragile, real. For the first time, neither of them felt alone in it. Spring came slowly, brushing the hills with muted green and golden light. The snowmelt ran in rivulets through the valley, carrying the faint scent of earth and renewal. Birds returned, flitting through the trees like small sparks of life. June Mallory moved through her clearing with purpose, gathering firewood. Her hands were steady, her breath even, the rhythm of survival now familiar but somehow softer than before. The cabin behind her seemed to breathe along with her, No longer a fortress against the world, but a home. Cal Riggins emerged from the barn, carrying a stack of chopped logs. His movements were slow but deliberate, the scar along his side fading into muscle and strength regained. He set the wood beside June and they worked in silence, the quiet between them no longer heavy but shared. "Need a hand with that?" he asked finally, his voice warm, teasing, the first real words in weeks that weren't tinged with pain or guilt. June smiled, tossing him a log without looking. "You're holding your own, aren't you?" He shrugged, eyes glinting with humor. "Been practicing. Don't want you thinking I'm helpless." They moved together, stacking the firewood in neat rows. The sound of axe against wood, the scrape of logs settling blended with the gentle rush of the creek and the song of the birds. It was ordinary work, but to them it was miraculous, proof that life could continue even after loss and danger. At one point June paused, wiping sweat from her brow. She glanced at Cal, and without preamble he said the words that had hovered unspoken between them for so long. "You don't have to be alone anymore." June stopped mid-motion, looking at him. The sun caught the edges of his hair, painting him in a halo of light and shadow. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her lips curved into a smile, soft, genuine, free from the ache of loneliness that had shadowed her for years. "No," she said quietly. "I guess I don't." The words were more than an answer. They were a promise, a beginning. Cal set down his log and stepped closer. The space between them no longer carried caution or fear or the heavy weight of grief. It carried understanding, companionship, and something like hope. "Then stay," he said, voice low, earnest. "Not just today, not just for now, stay." June's gaze softened and she reached out to rest her hand on his arm. "I think I might," she admitted. They resumed their work, shoulders brushing, hands sometimes meeting over the logs. It was simple. It was quiet. But it was enough. The cabin behind them, once silent and brooding, now held the warmth of shared effort. Inside, the hearth crackled with fire, a mirror to the quiet rebuilding happening outside. That evening, June carried the last of the stacked firewood to the porch. Cal followed, placing a fresh bundle near the hearth. His movements careful, deliberate, alive. For a moment, they simply stood side by side, taking in the clearing, the creek sparkling in the sunset, the trees bending gently in the breeze, the promise of spring stretching over hills that had once seemed endless and barren. "You'll teach me to chop like that?" Cal asked, his tone light, teasing again. June laughed, the sound carrying over the valley. "Don't get used to it." "I set a high standard," he grinned. "I like high standards." And as the sun slipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold, June realized something that had seemed impossible all winter. She could carry grief and love in the same heart, and both could thrive. Cal leaned against the rail beside her, shoulders brushing. They watched the fire take hold in the hearth, the smoke curling upward into a sky washed with evening light. No words were necessary. The silence was no longer lonely, it was restorative, warm, a quiet testament to survival, to courage, and to connection. And for the first time in years, June Mallory felt it fully. She was no longer alone. Outside, the valley hummed with life, the creek, the birds, the trees bending in the wind. And inside, in the cabin nestled among the hills of Coyote Bend, two souls had found a home in each other. The echo of loneliness was finally broken. If you enjoyed June and Cal's journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another Wild West story.